So today we'll be talking about sustainable chemistry and youth unveiling the global framework on chemicals. This is organized by International Younger Chemists Network Committee Science for Policy Committee, which is like working on the interface of bridging science and policy gaps. This webinar has been possible with kind support of ISC3 International Sustainable Chemistry Collaborative Center. So agenda for today will be, so first of all, welcome and introduction, then a brief introduction to IYCN. Then we have introduction to ISC3 by Anna Baker, who is with us from ISC3. Then introduction to sustainability and the sustainable development goals that will be either covered by Francisco or me, depending on the availability. Um, then some stakeholders' perspectives from Shannon, Lisa, and Ankit. We'll be talking about how these chemical issues are highly are from a stakeholder perspective, how are the impacts and how you can be a part of the change. Then we're talking about understanding chemicals policy framework, a brief introduction and history of how things have shaped over time, and what has been the key drivers in this case. Lastly, I'll be introducing you with the global framework on chemicals and a brainstorming session so that we can discuss some key elements of global framework on chemicals. Lastly, we will have stakeholders and training resources with concluding remarks. So now I hand over. International Younger Chemist Network works for works to empower young chemists, and that too, who are at their early careers need to be empowered in terms of how chemistry and areas allied with chemistry align. So our vision is to connect and empower younger chemists globally, and IYCN supports and advocates for younger scientists working across the chemical sciences towards a globally sustainable future. This is, as you see, the delegates attending first IYCN General Assembly. The picture belongs to Paris, 2019. We have so we openly welcome younger chemists from different parts of the world, irrespective of their regions. So as you can see, our coverage is quite wide. Any chemist who fulfill one of the following criteria, like is 35 years old, inclusive, is currently pursuing a chemistry-related degree, or has completed a chemistry-related degree or a training during the past 5 years. So if you fill in any of those criteria, you can definitely join IYCN. There is a membership form available that you can easily access. They are the members. Bianca Davids chairs. Vice chair is Tain Tekwich. And as you can see, our team is working in diverse areas, such as we partner. We have a sponsor, different industry and academic intersections and leaderships. We have specific committees dedicated to international society liaison. We have a social media committee. We also work towards how equity, diversity, and inclusion can be mainstreamed in the field of chemistry. We also work towards how science policy gap can be bridged, and I personally, lead the Science for Policy Committee. Then we have uh, you know, our or backend handling graphic designer, webmaster. So if you are interested in a part of being any of these committees, you're most welcome to IYCN. Next, we have uh, these are our different achievements. A memorandum of understanding we assigned in Brazil 2017. As you can see, we are now officially associated with the IUPAC. Now we are an official committee of IUPAC, and that empowers us to gain a wider access to resources and to empower younger chemists in much more sustainable way. Now we had these are the past activities that you can see that IYCN is engaged in. We have Global Women's Breakfast and global conversation on sustainability topics like these, which help us on tackling with different paradigms of chemistry, and also mainstreaming the current impacts of current social issues in general. So you can connect with us and through any of these platforms. Now and this is IPAC 2025, where we'll be again having General Assembly in 2025. Now I'll be handing over to Anna. She is a policy director at International Sustainable Chemistry Collaborative Center. She has been engaged in quite policy training programs there, and particularly works in the field of sustainable chemistry. So I'd like to invite her to introduce herself a bit more and then diving deep into um, the introduction to IYCN-3 and sustainable and green chemistry in general. Please go ahead.
Yeah, great, Luis. Thanks for handing over to me. My name is Anna Isabel Becker. I'm the Policy Director at the ISC3. And within the next 5 minutes, I would like to shortly introduce you to the ISC3 and to green chemistry and sustainable chemistry before I hand over back to my colleagues. Next slide, please. The ISC3 is an international center that fosters the transition of chemical and chemical-related sectors to sustainable chemistry. The center itself was founded in 2017 on the initiative of the Federal Ministry of Environment and the Federal Environment Agency. Both authorities are based in Germany. Our headquarter is based in Bonn, Germany, and it's hosted by the Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, in short, GIZ. It's the largest development agency, and it operates in cooperation with the Society for Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology, in short, DECHEMA, that's the ISC3 Innovation Hub, and with Leuphana University in Lüneburg as the ISC3 Research and Education Hub. Next slide, please. Our vision is sustainable chemistry for a sustainable world. Next slide, please. Our mission is the transformation towards sustainable chemistry as a major contribution to achieving the UN SDGs. This is especially important as we are currently facing multiple crises, as I think you are all aware of, such as climate change, global pollution, biodiversity loss, or the general scarcity of resources. Next slide, please. Sustainability in chemistry relates of a multitude of aspects and addresses several impacts and levels of impact. And therefore, a solution approach for a sustainable transformation of a whole sector or of a whole value chain, like the chemical sector we are currently looking at, has to take a systemic overall view and must take place within the planetary boundaries, as you can see in the figure below. At the same time, we have to serve the SDGs or the circle of impact we are moving in should of course serve the achievement of the SDGs, as you can see in figure 1. And basically all of the 17 SDGs are needed to achieve sustainable development. And the Stockholm Resilience Center clustered the SDGs in 3 groups: biosphere, society, and economy, as you can see on the picture above. And chemistry plays an important role in achieving all those SDGs and can only be sustainable if it also includes all 3 levels of sustainability. Lovish will explain the term of sustainability later. At the ISC3, we take a multi-stakeholder approach with partners, and we also target quite broadly. For example, we exchange with policymakers, with the private sector, with science, academia, and civil society. We also take a multi-sectoral approach and work with focus topics such as renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, or building and construction. At the next slide, you see our fields of work. The ISC3 engages globally to international policy and stakeholder dialogue, like the one we are having today. We offer research and academic expertise, provide knowledge and consulting and entrepreneurship and innovation. Additionally, we execute professional and academic trainings and help with advisory services. All those activities that you can see on this slide are flanked by public relations activities, such as also including publications and events. And on the next slide, I chose some selected results of our work I wanted to share with you, and also show that we are active on a global level. For example, we are active in Africa, Asia, North and South America. And we also generate quite an outcome. For example, we executed over 700 trainings. And on the next slides, I would like to explain a bit more on the differences between green chemistry and sustainable chemistry, because the terms are sometimes a bit confusing. And yeah, I would like to spend the last minute to elaborate on this. On this slide, we see green chemistry, an explanation on green chemistry. Green chemistry itself is a set of principles to design processes and products that are better for humans and the environment. Green chemistry is rather technical, and it focuses on less waste, less energy, less hazard, and renewable resources. Green chemistry looks at compounds, molecules, materials, and processes. And green chemistry, for example, thinks on how to develop a molecule and how does it not make harm. But applying green chemistry principles does not necessarily lead to a circular economy where the life cycle of products is extended as long as possible, or even a product can get a new life and can be used for something new. So green chemistry does not ask questions such as, do I even need this molecule? And so this is the part on green chemistry. And the response to this is chemistry for sustainability, which is in short, sustainable chemistry. And the approach of sustainable chemistry really looks at the service or at the function that a chemical can provide to us. For example, if you would like to build a house, instead of thinking we have to make plastic to build a house, you can think about the function that your house has to have and think how you can build it without chemicals, or with at least least amount of chemicals as possible. For example, you can also build the house with soil, stone, or any other materials, depending as well on the region where you live. In addition to that, sustainable chemistry includes ethical aspects and social aspects, and also includes all stakeholders. So this means people who work in a factory, people who live close by the factory, but also end users. It especially asks questions on how are underrepresented groups, such as children, youth, or elderly affected. And this also includes to think of people who collect the waste. And in the end, therefore, sustainable is an approach that really has a look at the whole life cycle and even beyond. In summary, green chemistry is how we can achieve sustainable chemistry, and therefore is an important element of sustainable chemistry. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Anna. So yeah, now I'll be taking over introduction to sustainability and sustainable development goals. So yes, so we're talking about because now as we did, as Anna has highlighted the role of the difference between green and sustainable. The green part particularly focuses on environmental aspect, while sustainability covers environmental, economic, and social pillar. We'll be discussing about this so that you know how is the paradigm changing. Focus is no more looking at just one part of environment and or one part of greening. It's about looking at the whole thing, looking at and this also builds up the background for why we are today discussing the global framework on chemicals. So, so as you can see, the term has been defined in the Brundtland Commission report in 1987, where it says that meeting the needs of present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. So as we see that we are currently facing triple planetary crisis: climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. So to tackle these issues in a more holistic way or in a more integrated way is the need of today. What has been happened in the past? What has happened in the past is that we have been focusing on one aspect, and then burden shifting has been occurring throughout. So this paradigm needs to be changed to some extent. So therefore, we talk about sustainability. So it has three pillars, as I told: economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. talking about the goals, as these goals were announced in 2015. We have these goals from economic growth, no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, and so on, to social inclusion, which talks about society and then talks about environmental protection in particular. We've talked about climate action, life below water, life on land. Particular focus definitely needs to be in environmental protection while simultaneously assuring social inclusion as well. Just will cite just one example here. Like we have been talking about certain kinds of energy transition these days. So whenever we think about it, whenever we think of changing the modes of vehicles, for example, we talk about going electrifying vehicles, or we talk about electrifying our fleet. We need to think of how the batteries are produced. For example, is the for example, the cobalt required for batteries comes from uh, quite vulnerable regions, which where women and children are particularly getting affected. They're basically child labor and things like that are happening for the production of cobalt and hence the batteries. So the idea here is that not to oppose one thing over other electric, not to say that electric vehicle are not to be adopted, but the idea is that uh, so to having a life cycle approach when we are talking of one alternative over the other. So I'll go to stakeholders' perspective. I'll invite those to introduce Shannon, Lisa, and Ankit, and then we shall move to their concerns, how they being a part, being in ground community, working at ground level for chemicals management, what has been their experience, so that we may recognize what is the need for sustainable chemicals management in today's. Over to Jules.
Okay, thank you, Lovish. Okay, in this part, we're now going to hear about a contribution about two young people who also engaged with chemistry, science policy, and how their visions, how the perspectives on this come around as a bridge we can do it for science policy and engage ourselves. So I'd like to introduce our two speakers. They are going to be Ankit Mazumdar and Shannon Lisa. I'll start with Ankit. He's currently a PhD student at the Fraunhofer Institute of Ceramics Technology and Systems in Dresden, Germany, and he's been involved in the field of chemical engineering and biotechnology in the past 7 years, specializing in biodegradation of chemicals and nanofunctionalization of cardiovascular devices. And today he will talk us about the global challenges facing the chemical industry, including environmental degradation and resource depletion, and is going to tell us about how international cooperation in shaping science policy, as many of the other challenges can transcend national boundaries. And also, we're going to welcome Shannon Lisa. She's currently serving as the global focal point of the Chemicals and Waste Use Platform, which is since 2021 has grown to a constituency of over 1,000 children, youth, and youth serving organization members worldwide that provide policy input, follow-up, and review across a wide range of regional and global chemicals, waste, and pollution processes, including Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm, and the Minamata Conventions, as well as the new global framework on chemicals. And she has devoted a career over the last 8 years to independently investigating chemical contamination in industrial sites and have fallen below the radar of regulatory systems, providing frontline communities access to our environmental data and technical advisors. So I'll start first with Ankit, and I'll invite him first to speak a little bit. So Ankit, the floor is yours.
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much for the floor, and thank you so much for the great introduction. Hi, I'm Ankit. I'm currently working as a scientist in Fraunhofer here in Germany, and I've been involved in the field of chemical engineering and bionanotechnology for the past 7 years or so. I've worked in green chemistry specifically for 3 years there, and through the actions of those. I have realized on how, for us, in order to foster a systematic understanding of environmental sustainability as students and as researchers, we need to uphold and prosper the principles and keep our research under the limits of the planetary boundaries, which I also saw in the previous slides, which were shared as before regarding the SDG goals as well. I'm not specifically having any presentation here because we just have 10 minutes to talk about this webinar, and I want to give Shannon the similar time for the same. I would just like to share a few experiences as a youth advocate for the same and as a researcher with regards to understanding sustainability, understanding the crisis, and understanding, most importantly, the green policies that we have at hand. From my personal experience as a researcher, I feel that Europe at least keeps green policy in its forefront. I have written over 4 grants last year when it comes to biodegradation projects. And in all my biodegradation projects, the most important thing is that each and every European Union grant needs a fulfillment of 1 page of circularity. So even if your grant does not involve a page a sustainable approach, you need to think out of the box to include circularity in the system, if not complete sustainability, which is a great policy to have because it gives a challenging approach for the researchers to build on the chemical innovations that we bring about and bring it into a circular loop to make it more sustainable for the environment. The other important aspect that I've seen with regards to chemical policy, especially in the forefront of industries, is that most of the projects that are now written involve a critical understanding of economic structures, under which we see that there is a prioritizing of social and environmental well-being over economic growth as well. Not only do industries search for this social and environmental well-being because more and more grants and projects are pushed out of it, but these NGOs, businesses, youth groups craft policies that prioritize the environment and campaign the challenge that the status quo and champion a brighter future with regards to that. For me, specifically when it comes to my field, where biodegradation and remediation holds a big aspect of like chemical waste treatment. In that field, I have figured out that in any project that is currently written by my group or in my current field, when I'm talking with industries, industry is just one important factor to be ticked out first. Is that how is the question of environmental well-being answered, and how is the bioremediation of that product being answered before being developed into a certain stage, which is quite important for us. Apart from that, in terms of youth advocacy, I'm involved in a student organization called IYCN, where we are doing youth policy and youth advocacy, and I've learned a lot and taken those lessons into consideration, and I feel that is also a small pillar that we need to bridge when it comes to chemical safety and understanding chemical environment. So yeah, I would like to give the floor now to Sharon to speak on it. Sorry for if I've taken any extra time.
Okay, thank you, Ankit. So we're going to pass off to Shannon, please. Your floor is yours.
Thank you, Ankit, so much, and thanks, Jose. I have a few slides here, so maybe I could share those if possible. Perfect.
Yeah, sure. Let me just oops, I think you can do that right now.
Okay, I think we're good, actually.
Yeah, great.
And hopefully we could see them on the screen.
Yes,
and I'll
we can
play
see
from
them.
the start here. Perfect. So
Right.
hi again, everyone. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here and to join the International Younger Chemists Network and the International Sustainable Chemistry Collaborative Center, here to promote strong engagement of young scientists and young people in all their diversity in the global framework on chemicals. And as Jose did a wonderful job introducing, my name is Shannon Lisa. I currently serve as the global focal point for the Chemicals and Waste Youth Platform. And the Chemicals and Waste Youth Platform has been built over the last 3 years into the first self-organized and collective network working to bring young people's solutions and priorities to global chemicals and waste policy-making processes at the UN. Now, when we first launched, youth engagement was largely absent from chemicals and waste policy negotiation processes. And this is probably best visualized in a chart that you see on your screen. This was produced by the Strategic Approach to International Chemicals Management, or SICAM, the SICAM Secretariat. And this is one of the first and possibly only stakeholder analysis in a UN chemicals process that tracked youth as its own category. For stakeholder participation across nearly 15 years from 2006 to 2020, youth, you could see at the top, were a mere little blip on the radar, between 0 to 2% of total stakeholders. And yet SciCam, which is now succeeded by the Global Framework on Chemicals, is an open, multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral model. So if young people were not being engaged in this space that's very open to civil society, then certainly they were not being engaged across other more restricted country-driven chemicals processes like the legally binding conventions, BRS, Minamata, and beyond. So as Jose introduced, we've now grown to over 1,000 children, youth, and youth-led organizations, including IYCN, who's represented on our coordination team. And we have members signed up from over 150 countries. We formally engage across the UN's Chemicals and Pollution Action Program of work, so BRS, Minamata, SciCam, and now the Global Framework on Chemicals, along with the INC Plastics Treaty negotiations and much more, and a range of regional processes as well. We also support youth who are leading projects to eliminate waste, drive safer chemistry solutions, and prevent pollution within their own communities, institutions, and workplaces. And here are just a few examples of the on-the-ground projects already being led by our constituency members. So Salongo, who is the Chemicals and Waste Youth Platform's Asia and the Pacific regional lead from Mongolia, installed the first pharmaceutical waste collection boxes at 25 pharmacies in the capital city and surrounding provinces of Mongolia, and has collected and processed over 2,700 kilograms of medicinal waste free of charge to the local communities. And then we have Ola, who's our Middle East and North Africa regional lead. She's the first environmental activist working on chemicals and waste from the indigenous peoples of Arwad Island in Syria. She founded the RICO project and coordinates nearly 100 volunteers across Syria on community plastic pollution management. She led efforts to conduct waste management training of emergency response personnel and families in humanitarian shelters after the magnitude 4.3 earthquake struck Syria and neighboring countries in February 2023. And there are hundreds more examples of our young pollution solutionists, as we like to call them, within our platform. And through our youth-centered educational resources and our work to unite young people who are already working on sustainable chemistry and waste management, or who are keen to learn about those topics, we have already created change on an international level, and certainly with support of IYCN and ISC3 as well. And that takes us to ICCM5 and the Global Framework on Chemicals. So one such outcome of this collaborative work was the development of the 2023 Global Youth Declaration on Chemicals and Waste. And this was presented by the Chemicals and Waste Youth Platform during the high-level segment of ICCM5 this past September. The Youth Declaration presented 14 policy priorities, which ultimately influenced the text of the Global Framework on Chemicals. Among the children and youth proposals that gained support by negotiators, target B7, which you could see on the bottom of the screen there, was a particular win. So this laid the groundwork for more comprehensive data collection on chemicals. Specifically, the target focuses on disaggregating concentration and exposure data by age, sex, and geographic region, which can uncover previously overlooked environmental and human health disparities and opportunities for policy intervention. Our 35 youth delegates directly negotiated the text of the GFC over the course of several intersessional processes and culminating in ICCM5, this 5th session of the International Conference on Chemicals Management. And this included sticking it out in the plenary room and defending youth positions for nearly 28 hours overnight on the final day of negotiations before the text was adopted. And again, we also received wonderful support from ISC3 and IYCN and a lot of other youth-led and youth-serving partners in putting on the first ever Youth Forum on Chemicals Governance as a formally recognized special event of ICCM5. So just to take a step back here and kind of where we're going from this moment, which is, a conference in time. And then a lot of people ask, once conferences are over, then what happens? Does everybody go home and just, forget about their great time for the course of a week or so there? And the answer certainly for us is no. As a multidisciplinary platform of youth, we further recognize more broadly that in sustainable chemicals management and policy making, we have to not only bring to the table at negotiation processes and technical processes, and community engagement processes, we have to not only involve the traditionally recognized experts, so scientists, technical specialists, government agencies, and negotiators, but what we like to call experts of the lived experience. Who better understands the locations where hazardous waste is being disposed of or what the market value of discarded materials are than informal workers? And who is more acutely aware of the human cost associated with improper chemicals management than the frontline communities who are directly exposed and impacted by it? Their early, sustained, and meaningful engagement is also key to effective policies. So young scientists can be torchbearers in rethinking how we research and advance sustainable chemistry principles, how to work alongside and communicate with the public and with impacted communities, and how to bring the priorities born from scientific research and the lived experiences of those impacted to policymaking spaces. And so as we learn more about the global framework on chemicals in further segments during our session today, I'd like for us to really sit and consider these questions and discuss them with each other. One is, which groups are being engaged at the policymaking table for chemicals and waste management, and which groups have been traditionally excluded? Two, how can negotiations and implementation of policymaking frameworks like the GFC benefit from the perspective and contributions of young early career scientists? And three, is chemistry education preparing its students to engage in chemical policy making processes? And how can groups like IYCN-ISC3 and the Chemicals and Waste Youth Platform advocate for upgrading chemistry curricula at all levels? And so in closing, or how about not closing, but rather a new beginning, I hope, for a youth-led sustainable chemistry transformation, please continue to engage in the great work of IYCN and ISC3 and with our network at the Chemicals and Waste Youth Platform. And I've included our membership details, our communication channels, and further information linked to this slide. And thank you so much. Back over to you, Jose.
All right, thank you so much, Shannon. It was very interesting insight, and also thank you for providing us some variable insights on how chemistry policy is very important in both of your works and how it encourages people to engage with all these issues. So thank you so much for your input. I'll just have to remind we have some attendees going to speak and raising their hands. We are going to have a session part of going to have a brainstorming session where you guys can contribute, and then you can also chat with us and give you some of your insights. And at this part, which is not going to be widely available to you, already have this question. Yes, these slides are going to be available. We're going to put this first part of the webinar free for you guys to see. And right now, we are going to continue our webinar with a little bit of understanding our chemistry policy frameworks, which we need a little bit to talk about after Shannon's great presentation about the mechanistics around science policy. So let's start. I'll be starting with, let me just see if I can share, I can control this screen. Okay. So I'm going to start by introducing a little bit about what chemistry policy frameworks actually are, which is something that you can participate on, how they develop with an historical overview of the frameworks and how their main documents are structured, and then give you a small glimpse how they'll play in a role in international policy, not just environmental, chemical, but also in a wider range of international cooperation. So just a little bit of introduction. Chemistry and policy do work on hand. And this is a set, when you talk about frameworks on chemical policy, we're talking about structures of regulations, guidelines, and practices to the management of chemicals with a specific jurisdiction. Essentially, we're going to target some elements that are involved with chemistry actions that the governments need to uphold and make some regulations about it without going to harm the safer chemistry, the safer sustainability of the communities. We're talking about legislation and regulation, how chemistry policy should be working on, how we can manage risks associated with chemical industries, chemical actions, how institutional structures should be played out, and the public participation and transparency. Essentially, it's drawing a playbook, as you say, to how chemicals from chemistry and policy and society can measure up and can overlap during these conferences. And so this is a movement that is going to, it has been touring around mainly over the second part of the 20th century. We at least highlighted here the first big issue in 1962 with the first public awareness about environmental and health impacts by a publication of Rachel Carson about Sound Spring influencing future chemical policies. And then mainly the first groundbreaking action in the 70s was the United Nations Conference on Human Environment, namely the Stockholm Conference, which marked the start of a conversation of the environmental impacts of human activities. Basically, it is going to, the policymakers acknowledge that we have a specifically problem that we need to address. Not that policy itself cannot bring us all the answers. We also need to bring science and chemistry in. And so when increasing realization of the problem of climate change and also the global the greenhouse effect in the 80s, the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete ozone layer was really designed to phase out these substances. And also, of course, in the 90s, we had the UN Conference of the Environmental Development, which was named the Earth Summit, led to adoption to an agenda which include a framework to the sound manageable chemicals. So we're seeing how a path of policy-making decisions as to accompany the issues that chemistry needs to tackle on. And as we're going to the 21st century, you can see the Stockholm Conference on Persistent Pollutants and International Treaty Amount to eliminate and restrict production of POPs. We also have in 2002, the groundbreaking work of SciChem, which is a strategic approach, international chemicals management, to overcome is a policy framework to promote chemical safety as to make an umbrella of all the chemical issues that we have to make prior to the SciChem. And developing in 2006, we have also a very interesting part of the REACH framework established in European Union to the most comprehensive global regulatory framework. And of course, I'd like to highlight, as Shannon did, the groundbreaking work on the global framework on chemicals established in the with ICCM-5 in Bonn, which focused on the reducing adverse effects of chemicals and waste. And through this historical overlap that I want to see, I think it's just, okay. There we go. So we, with this story timeline, I'd like to share with you that this is an ongoing process, and the issues that chemistry needs to address sometimes does not go hand in hand with the policy framework. As you say, this is a long process that has to be built, and of course, data sharing is very important because we have to amass a lot of data to increase the awareness of policymakers and, of course, our input as young people to understand and make them understand that we also are impacted by this and major impacts, and we are made to tackle all of this. But these frameworks, mainly they are not just difficult policy papers to understand. We have the amalgamation of agreements that contribute to global governance. Basically, this is going to talking about a playbook, which is like the GFC that was currently approved in the last ICCM-5. And when we are talking about what they can do, what specific targets that they can have, one of them was to phase out highly hazardous pesticides by 2035, where risk and management alternatives are available. This was going to be a very difficult document to reach a certain consensus, and you can see it more about it on this QR code, where you can see and consult all these documents. And I'll say that over to when we are structuring the GFC documents, let me see if I can press the slide. Okay. Okay, so we are going to, in the ICCM5, we can say the structural main documents from all these CMCs, and also we have its own evolution from SciChem to the Global Framework on Chemicals. And then you can see that this is going to be an ongoing process which generated a consensus for the International Conference of Chemical Management. So basically, this is going to be a wide-ranging of will be this part of the Seigenberg combination. You can also find out the QR code for the extra information on this if you are actually going to consult the documents that phase out all this information, and then you can see what types of targets and measures that the policy frameworks actually did towards young people and young chemistry. So this is so what type of role does these documents do and what these conferences will actually have? I'd like to give you a small example, which was very interesting, effective one, which was the Minamata Convention of Mercury. This was established in 2013 in Kumamoto, Japan, which was an international treaty dealing with protecting human health and environmental from anthropogenic emissions and releases of mercury. Essentially, we had like this groundbreaking document that we could say that try to harmonize globally that we have to address this chemical issue and trying to establish boundaries that are going to be very, very useful to us to address not only as individuals, as society, but also as policy and makers. So what can a policy framework like this do for us and do for us as a society? Of course, you can find out more in that QR code, but I'll try to name the three main key points that we achieved. In this document, over 100 countries have ratified it and required to report on progress, which is going to harness even more data to understand how this is going to be used. Also, we have developed countries that provide technical assistance and financial support to developing nations to help them to address specifically this part. In this point, like the cooperation in between all these moves is going to be key for the establishment of a wide global-wide answer to this problem. And also this convention led to establishment of regulations on mercury emissions, trade, and safe disposal. You can actually think that it's going to be a very hard-on subject when you can gather more than 100 countries and they can come together and establish one single framework to address this specific chemical problem. So this is going to be very, very, very interesting when you think about individual countries acting for themselves, but when we have actually a group of countries that contribute to all these massive problems that are interconnected globally with one another, that is a key power of science policy, just to bring together more people to the science, more people, more data, and of course, us as representative groups, as the young people, we also have to understand and try to give out our chance to make this our voices audible towards also making these types of changes. So wrapping up these key points, I'd like to say that these frameworks are crucial for safeguarding human health. It's like the best part of EOS regulation as a society can do for protect us from these types of hazardous problems we have from chemicals. These frameworks have some interesting milestones that are difficult to implement, but their ongoing work requires us to be persistent, be knowledgeable, and also to contribute for them and not these topics fade away. And also that cooperation is pivotal in chemical policy, and that without any patience and resilience from every stakeholder involved, and all the realization of these problems that affect everyone else and everyone else's community and everyone combined, we need to provide key answers and global answers to these problems. So this was like a short description of what I would like to take you on this. And we also now at this part, we'd like to talk a little bit about the global framework on chemicals for a planet free of harm from chemicals and waste.
So, as as have been already discussed a lot, that chemical frameworks, how they are helping us progress in the towards sustainability goals. So again, the background is like we discussed triple planetary crisis, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. We all know that how it is impacting our world. So so definitely changes are required. Policies are being in place and being developed in more mature way. Now GFC is one such attempt. So so this is like a quick summary of what has been given in the GFC, and then we will try to brainstorm how GFC is actually helping out. So, first of all, the aim is to aim of this global framework on chemicals is to prevent, or wherever prevention is not possible, minimize harm from chemicals and waste to protect the environment and human health, including that of vulnerable groups and workers. Now, here they have specified who are the vulnerable groups and workers in the text, like these involve different socially marginalized groups as well as you know uh, gender-wise vulnerable and so on. The different categories that we can see, like the local communities, indigenous people, and peoples with disability, women, migrants, farmers, all those are covered in this particular aspect. Stakeholders, as we can see, stakeholders are those people or communities or group which are either impacted or creating an impact on the overall implementation of the framework in any way. So that's government, which creates policies, regional economic integration organization working out together how can interest for those reasons can be served. Now, intergovernmental organizations, we have different intergovernmental organizations which are again formed with the help of government, civil societies, industries, businesses, financial sector. So all these are stakeholders in this context because all have either a role to play or they are getting impacted in some way. So sectors that are particularly targeted, they have kept it open-ended, both stakeholders and sectors. So obviously, at the time of development of framework, it's not possible to list all the possible stakeholders and all the possible sectors. Therefore, they have specified some that are definitely under the radar, and then others which will also come in due time. So this involves agriculture, environment, health, education, finance, development, and labor and more. So moving to the next slide. The global framework on chemicals has been already discussed. It's like it has 5 strategic objectives, 28 targets. It's multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder, as we have already discussed. The Bonn Declaration, as you can see, the ministers and head of delegation stakeholder leaders who gathered in Bonn, Germany, in the 5th session of International Conference on Chemicals Management, pledged to strengthen the action for tackling the crisis of pollution from chemicals and waste. And then, so we have a UNEP administrator GFC in place, which is time limited, which is fund time limited, that allow multilateral, bilateral, private sector sources to be established or has been established. So this is like somewhat the outline of the GFC. I'll be presenting it in 2 slides. So again, vision is like, as we have already discussed, is in the text only, a planet, it's the title only, a planet free of harm from chemicals and waste for safe, healthy, and sustainable future. Then scope is life cycle management. So that's really important when we talk about such frameworks, that it's not just one part of the supply chain or one part of the whole system. We are not only focusing on, say, the production, or we are not only focusing on, say, consumption. We are focusing from very, very, very raw material extraction to the waste generation part, covering whole life cycle, and even if possible, recycling, reuse, or whatever is possible. So, like cradle to cradle approach, we are taking here in. Then principles and approaches. If we talk about, so they have particularly adopted these 6 principles and approaches. First is knowledge and information sharing. So framework in general has admitted that there is a information heterogeneity across different regions across the world. So knowledge and information sharing. Those who have access to knowledge or educational resources or information should share it with the other stakeholders. It's clearly written. And then transparency at all levels should be encouraged, so that the whatever actions are being taken are clearly visible, or and can be easily tracked. There is no hiding of important facts. Then human rights should be at the core of this management, so that it's including, so it's again includes social part of sustainability. Then groups in vulnerable situations, they must be supported, or they must be taken into consideration whenever we are creating or we are developing a policy to for sustainable chemicals management. Then comes the gender equality part. For the first time, they have identified gender equality as a critical concern for the chemicals management in the framework, and that's to be appreciated, because in many regions of the world, that is women are or any other gender is impacted differently as compared to others. So preventive approaches, the as we can see, we already discussed, the aim is to prevent at the first place. So preventive approaches are to be preferred or prioritized. If complete prevention is not possible, then only you go to minimization part. Just any policies or any initiative that you take for sustainability uh, should not impact, uh, for example, marginalized groups more in a way that it hinders their development in some sense. For example, it should not happen that burden shifting happens, as I gave in the initial example of electrification. So in that case, you manufacturing of battery and cobalt production, that's impacting the communities in the one of the most I'd say financially poor countries in the world. So the transition should be in the way that it provides justice to all. Then collaboration and participation. So that should be promoted across countries, across different stakeholders, across different paradigms. And now, according to this vision, scope, and principles and approaches, strategic objectives have been determined, which is first, establishment of legal frameworks, institutional mechanisms, and capacities. Accordingly, they have mapped 7 targets. Similarly, knowledge, information sharing, and data generation. So again, that should so here they're talking about how knowledge and information, which different countries, different geographies, and different people, different communities having different capacities, they should be shared, and data should be generated in a way that is accessible to all stakeholders, and so that actions can be taken accordingly. Then is issues of concern. So it specifically says that issues of concern should be identified, prioritized, and addressed in time. Then safer alternatives and innovative and sustainable solutions. So the focus should be on finding safer alternatives by design, and then innovative and sustainable solutions. There should be enhanced implementation then on. So now diving a bit deep into the targets part. So as I said, strategic objectives are mapped to the targets, and that way 7 targets for legal frameworks, institutional mechanisms, capacities. I won't go deep into all the targets. It's basically what they talk about is holding governments, companies, intergovernmental bodies, and all stakeholders in general liable for or not liable, if not liable, at least responsible for what responsible for establishing those chemicals management framework in place at their levels. And then talking more about how particularly it also talks about access to poison centers, which means there should be uh, 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 open information about different chemicals, how they harm, and so on. Then comes second part, which is knowledge, information sharing, and data generation. So in that case, they talk about how they also focus on how research and development should happen, and also they should be shared across different stakeholders. Similarly, so issues of concerns, once they are identified, they should be addressed in time, with having set timelines and a segmentation of how the work should proceed. And then finally, safer alternatives, so innovative and sustainable solutions. So again, this is where again there are many aspects that can be taken into consideration, including traditional knowledge, maybe novel ways of financing. Then there are integrated management approaches. So different solutions are emerging across different areas, and this particular strategic objective map focuses on that. Finally, enhanced implementation. Once you have those safer alternatives, innovative knowledge of innovative and sustainable solutions in place, you should be able to so there should be ways to clear guidelines to how to enhance the implementation, and that's how they are mapped. There are different mechanisms in place. So implementation programs. So now there will be so earlier until the now, because SciChem is no more existent. So earlier when SciChem was there, the name of the conference was International Conference on Chemicals Management. Fifth session ended in last September 2023. And now we will be having International Conference on Global Framework of Chemicals, which is under the mechanism to support implementation program. There will be national implementation programs. I mean, how governments, local governments can take initiatives up, and then there are a focus on that. Regional cooperation, as we talked about earlier about a regionally integrated economic organization. So economically integrated regional organization. So that is part of this cooperation and coordination. Lastly, engaging all different stakeholders altogether. So again, further they talk about issues of concern. So there is a proper format given. I will, so this is an easily accessible format. You search global framework on chemicals, and then you will find, there is a proper format to it to register your issues of concern. These issues of concern are sent to Secretariat, and if you think these issues of concern are basically those which are not yet identified in the framework, but you think it is important, or your community think it is important and it should be considered. So there is a proper way to channelize your concerns to the right place, and then if the issue is considered significant, then this may be further as per our target C, that can be taken up. Pros, then maybe different countries come ahead and sign for addressing those issues. Then there is capacity building initiatives, financial consideration. There are different financial mechanisms in place to support implementation. You have industry partnerships is promoted, private finance is promoted, and sustainable finance. All those things are mentioned in the text. Then there are institutional arrangements. So how I won't go deep into it, but how basically the whole hierarchy would function, and how all the systemic implementation of all those will be considered in this part. Taking stock of progress, there are particularly so I will show in the next slide like how measurability indicators are identified, and then basically this is about how different countries are progressing on different goals, different strategic objectives, and then their targets. Those will be taking stock of progress, and then revising and updating framework. So there will be the framework is open to revision and updation. Whenever the conference happens, so you can nominate issues say 6 months before, and then there is a particular specification how you can do that. And then those issues can be addressed. This is in particular measurability structure, which is provided in the annexure of the global framework on chemicals. As you can see, there are high-level indicators, and there are strategic objectives. Then there are headline indicators, targets, and indicators. So again, since it is adopted it has been adopted in September only, so indicators are yet to be determined. So there is a lot happening in this space, and if you want to be a part of this activism, you can certainly contribute significantly. Lastly, key points. So GFC framework, which is formerly SciChem framework, is a major milestone in the international chemical policies as it fills existing gaps in international chemicals and waste management. Then elements of the global framework on chemicals, such as the measurability structure, to track progress of its implementation, will be developed and discussed by a tailor-made and ad hoc working group in the future. There are ad hoc working group which are working on it. The next international chemical conference will be in 2026. Until then, stakeholder groups can take concrete steps and activities in order to support the implementation, as I said. So now the brainstorming part. So I'd like to ask all of you who are here, you can maybe Jose can help me because I can't see the Q&A screen. You can, the question is, so we want to brainstorm on how traditional and indigenous knowledge contribute to sustainable chemicals management. So the idea, let me give you context. So for example, if we talk about India, there are various traditional and indigenous ways to manage chemicals in general. For example, we have sustainable building practices in traditionally imbibed in the culture. For example, using mud instead of cement, which what Anna already highlighted. That's a traditional way of buildings in India also. Secondly, we have for at the time where there was no air conditioners, no no ways to cool homes. Then people had managed to devise different ways. For example, spending time under the shade of a trees, or in some way, they had those mechanisms in place which cooled the air in a sustainable way, like managing through the inflow of water, and water is also not getting wasted. So there are many ways that we see in the traditional knowledge. Transportation is one of the paddle rickshaws instead of say motor vehicle are still in tradition in India. So these are some of the examples from India that I can see contribute to sustainable chemicals management in some way. I would like to know your perspectives or your way, how you think in your areas, your regions, or you have realized for somewhere else. You can come up with, you can tell us that, and that will be really interesting to explore how that works. Hi Ankit, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the floor. I think the aspect of traditional and indigenous knowledge is quite immense when it comes to sustainable chemical management. A lot of I can say it both for the perspective of India and Europe as well. In India, when I was working as a nanoscientist, we used our indigenous knowledge of plant species to synthesize nanoparticles. So I was working in green chemistry of nanoparticle synthesis for 3 years, and we developed nanoparticles based on green chemistry synthesis through the plant extracts that we got from traditional knowledge, from the traditional books, which had high potency for reduction. So this is something that I feel can be translated into viable products as well. And why I say viable products for chemicals management, because now when I came to Europe, I brought the initial work of the nanoparticle that I made in India to Europe. And we are using again a wound healing system. We are building a wound healing system over that nanoparticle as a potential application. And we are also making sure that the wound healing system that we are developing here as a traditional bandage comes from traditional polymers that can be recycled back into the environment. Some of them could be cellulose derived. Some of them could be derived from polymers which are from special clay material, functionalized. And all of these clay materials have been used in traditional medicines across Europe. So yes, I do feel that the traditional and religious knowledge contributed to a lot, but it also needs the connection of how people an industry would buy it. As a researcher, I simply don't believe that you can derive a paradigm change only because you wish to. You have to have an industrial aspect of it. You have to have to an extent, okay, and that is my personal opinion, that to an extent needs to have a capitalist approach on it, because that is what sells in the market. And unless and until you can capture a market, you cannot capture the masses. And market capture requires industrial incentives. So transferring this traditional and indigenous knowledge into something valuable for the industries for chemicals management will be the key. And if we can do that, we can capture the masses and it can become quite a big movement.
Thanks, Ankit. I mean, it's a really great insight into it. If anyone else like to pitch into it, I mean, we are open to it. And I think these discussion help us understand. Now this is from a chemist who is working in the field of polymers, like nanotechnology and polymers, who has brought these perspectives. How traditional knowledge can be important, and how industry incentivization is equally important to scale it up. I think the purpose of this webinar is, yes, at one end to introduce global framework on chemicals. On the other hand, because this framework talks about it, that traditional indigenous knowledge should be promoted, and that's one way we are trying to capture. I mean, if anyone else likes to pitch over it, please feel free to raise your hand. Okay. Okay. Two participants raised their hands. You can see. Shannon, please go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Lavish. You know, I'm just coming into this from a perspective of somebody that has worked alongside frontline communities for almost 9 years now, and absolutely don't want to speak on behalf of Indigenous peoples who are certainly contributing so much to environmental restoration, management, and sustainable chemistry, and often their stories are not made visible. And I think, you know, that's equally across most rights holders groups, including children and youth. And, you know, we have to consider also that, you know, the different groups that we're engaging are not homogenous. So even within the children and youth constituency, you know, obviously a young person from one context like me living in you know, pretty close, about an hour away from New York City, might have vastly different experiences from, you know, somebody living in Kenya, for example. So we really try to bring as many perspectives to the table as possible. But just thinking about this question in terms of, you know, some of the arguments made at the negotiation table for the global framework, and including rights holders groups, and then especially one of the children and youth priorities, which was target B7, and that's disaggregated data on the basis of age, sex, geographic region, you know, and many other criteria that as of this point have not really broadly or strategically been considered when we think about chemicals management. You know, I'd like to consider how we look at risk of chemicals and how that, you know, is mostly based on primarily what is known or what we believe is knowable through Western scientific analysis and knowledge. And, you know, a limited amount of focus has been placed on local understandings of risk. So I think this is an element when we're talking about, you know, what SciChem was and what we, you know, negotiated and want the global framework on chemicals to be, which is truly a multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral, open, everybody at the table type model. You know, I think we really need to bring those perspectives in terms of, you know, of course, we want to think of this in terms of traditional knowledge, but I mean, you know, indigenous knowledge is also current. It's flexible. You know, it's not, you know, something that has not moved or changed for decades and millennia. You know, so indigenous peoples are consistently providing so much new and fresh perspective, you know, in the implementation of different policy frameworks and their negotiation. And I think we need to move beyond, you know, kind of what I said in my remarks earlier about who is considered experts at the table, right? You know, who has previously, you know, been considered an expert in the negotiations, which is, you know, somebody with a PhD or somebody that is part of a government agency. And we also need to consider those experts of the lived experiences too, and not just look at them as, you know, these vulnerable populations that it's nice to have them, you know, have a flag on a chair and just have them sit and observe, but we really want them to be active partners, you know, in the crafting of these policy frameworks and in their implementation. And so that's certainly what, you know, I know we're working on in the Chemicals and Waste Youth platform. What IYCN is doing a really great job, you know, bringing a diverse group of early career scientists and professionals to the table, and ISC3, and really leading the charge in, you know, kind of transforming what sustainable chemistry education looks like. You know, just bringing in the youth aspect when we're talking about who needs to be the ones implementing the GFC. It's, you know, over the long term, over the next years into the future, it's going to be all of those, you know, young people that are currently sitting in classrooms today, getting their chemistry degrees, you know, and related scientific degrees, working as community advocates in their communities on the ground, I mean, these are all the people that are going to be doing the groundwork to actually implement this framework. So yeah, that just wanted to provide maybe a little context there of, looking around, seeing who's at the table and what we consider to be expertise and ways of knowing when we're looking at chemicals management and risk, I think is really important, for this question. So thank you, Jose. Back over to you.
Thanks, Shannon. Now let's move to the next question. It's really insightful. Really talking about how indigenous communities can, have been working and restoring, and we still are yet to acknowledge them in the era of where communication is so robust. I mean, still their voice is being not, and their perspectives are not still not open. How can the implementation of global framework on chemicals be supported? This is the next question. As we have already gone through we have taken some glimpse of what GFC is. Now we'd like to deep into like how you as a youth stakeholder uh, can support the implementation of global framework on chemicals. There are different ways as we talk about nominating issues of concern and other things which are mentioned in the text. We'd like to go more deep into the aspects what you think, say for example, can be an issue to be nominated, or you think what can be a concern that should be addressed uh, in the conferences that are going to happen in say in 2026, or the forums that are taking place. Say for example, development of indicators that is happening. We'd like to know what are your perspectives on that part, and therefore open the floor to you. Jos, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking about a little bit about what Jenna was talking about, and what we as a community and as a group the best we can do is for ourselves is actually to empower ourselves with more information and more knowledge about what's going on around ourselves. And that's why there are a bunch of things that we can do, but I think the most important thing that we can do as young people engage with this process is that we can build our capacity and build our technical expertise on this. For example, in developing countries or misrepresented minorities in particular, they require more technical assistance and more information to implement the GFC effectively. The support of training, technology transfer, expertise sharing, I think it's for example, us that are trying to contribute to a better community that have this information, have to try to disseminate it in a way that it can be knowledgeable and readily available to everyone, that's so it can be empowered to involve the process, because we already seen that we can all individually and locally, by just trying to local governments or country governments, it's going to be very hard. And it's why fostering collaboration between all these chemical risks and international cooperation is vital to perform all these frameworks that we're talking about. If we only by doing that as a collaborative effort, you can do like this actually making work. It's very difficult to just have one country, one group trying to lead all of this. So it's just only coordinated efforts can be the mobilizing action to address these chemical challenges. So I think that might be the two very important things that we as interested group, as stakeholder group, can engage to this part right here.
Thanks, Joe. It's really insightful how, as multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral collaboration is already highlighted in the text. Now, from a young chemist perspective, you highlight how it can be fostered more, how different communities can come together. Now, I would like to invite Ankit, who had also an opinion on this.
Thank you for the floor again. I think when it comes to policy implementation and the support for policy implementation, and for something which has been introduced very recently and I think for a mass mobilization, there are two possibilities in my perspective. One could be if huge amount of money is moved out for policy implementation, which is true. Wherever money drives, policy drives, which is a direct relation to that. Or secondly, wherever advocacy drives, and advocacy drives can start from the youth, I believe. Working in the youth level for the past 2 years in Europe, in one of the largest interdisciplinary organizations, I have come to this conclusion that whenever you have a platform which can network to advocate regulations, especially chemical regulations at a national, regional, or international level, us as stakeholders who are putting it in the forefront need to picture it within the goals of student and youth organizations. For example, I'll give you an example of my youth organization, which is IJ. And we have a working group, which I'm a coordinator of, the Eco-Responsible Society. Of course, the topic of chemical conventions and the topic of GFC can be easily incorporated into our activity plans to plan events, to raise awareness, and to engage policymakers. Also to consider that we have our seat at the UN as well through our extended party youth advocate, which is the Generation Climate Europe. So I think most importantly, when we are reaching stakeholders, reach stakeholders in a way that you provide them a value out of it. Of course, whenever there is money not involved, there is, of course, the added value of what the youth organization can bring in a fresh perspective for the youth. So that's the incentive for any youth organization. And that's, I think, what IJ is also searching for. So conferences like these, discussions like these can be extended to these youth organizations, I believe. I will surely take it to my organization as well. I think that is something that can leverage a lot of policy making in Europe, because I firmly believe, at least in Europe, youth do have a voice. It is heard. It may not be directly reflected, but it may indirectly implement itself into parliaments and policymakers, and both intrinsically and extrinsically drive the change. So, yeah.
So, Ankit, now I would like to invite Stanley. Please go ahead.
Okay, hello everyone. So my name is Stanley, and I would just like to make some comments too on how we can implement the GFC, and how we can support it better. So for the youth, there are various ways we could actually do this. But I think I agree with the last speaker on awareness. I think if there's a lot of awareness that there is actually a global framework on chemicals, it will really go a long way in helping the implementation of it. Because you think there's one thing to implement create a global framework on chemicals. Sometimes the government representatives who are at these meetings, they may not want to even push for these policies. And so if young youth organizations hold them accountable, they're going for briefings with them, debriefs with them, inviting them on programs, informing other young members, young youth organizations about the framework on chemicals. I think it will go a long way in letting governments know that, okay, there is a framework on chemicals. People know about this, and people are watching to see how you now enact an implementation strategy on it. But if everybody stays quiet, I tell you, sometimes, as you know, governments want to do what they want to do that favors the government more than it favors the policies that are being made. So in summary, what I'm trying to say is that creating more awareness on youth groups about the framework on chemicals is one. And then secondly, engaging the government, letting the government know that, yes, the youth, young people are also aware of this, and the government should do something about implementation strategies of this in the various countries, will also go a long way too. Thank you.
Thank you, Stanley. So yeah, I mean, now we understand how information, those sessions like these, empowering youth, as Ankit and Stanley highlighted, are important. Now, taking this into account, you know, definitely, again, the vested interest part that was highlighted by Stanley is also important. How, different, I mean, how youth needs to come forward, because it's the youth who is going to get impacted in future. So that's the one lesson, and how you can empower yourself, and how you can, uh, you know, educate yourself. We won't go into the next two brainstorming questions that we had because of the time constraint. We'll now tell you or inform you how you can gain a basic knowledge about sustainable chemistry, and how and in general the space of chemicals management. Over to host Joseph. Please go ahead and enlighten us about the resources that are there for stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll just try to make this, what's the remote here? Okay, there you go. So, okay, as we're talking about the empowerment of youth, and this is general, all groups in general, is going to be the very most diverse part, and much more important part that we can also do. And knowledge of what information is valuable to all stakeholders involved is essential to communicate all the message we're trying to say. So we are talking about this framework. If we're telling us about chemists, educators, policymakers, we need to address some types of resources that will be available to us, to training, also to empower with information. And in this part, we can find several types of resources that we can find. First of all, can be topics of training and types of training, and some more formal or informal courses that will be very much of our interest to try to help this part of the program. And when considering the type of training resources that we can have, let me just say, can you please my last slide, please, Lovish? I'm not trying, okay, there we go. So if we can use, for example, we have such an example that we are most often used, for example, in the policy sector management. And this table shows us right here in the case of the UK Parliament that the types of research that were done to scourge everybody just presents the challenges about chemical policy. We have more of a statistics, we have expert opinions, we have public polls, we have surveys and interviews that using unaffected. And as you can see in the total, we have like a minimal differentiation about what it can do as numbers and or any information you can do it from just statistics, then rather than open-ended answers for example in interviews or those affected. So maybe the most important thing I was trying to address is that how we can empower us to understand this data that is going to be evacuability and errors in MS from the polymer parties. So next slide, please, Lovish. Okay, so how as chemists, regarding on this type of information we can have, what we need to consider. First, we have to acknowledge that scientific literature is going to be our groundwork to establish our ground of information. And through that literature, we can make us ourselves the great, most important messages we can convey to a general knowledge on legislation. And using that, for example, not using very much complex language, but mostly we're using a peer-to-peer approach on this. We have to address how to make changes that are plausible. And in this sense, we have to compromise what are there for measures that we have to balance when we are trying to apply to a specific chemistry-related policy we want. For example, is there money involved? How we can have our do we have a robust financial structure to implement this? Is this change going to have a larger impact, or how it affects communities in a differentiative mode? Do we need to implement remedial measures? So this is kind of a trade-off when you're trying to diverse your message to us as policymakers, but you also need to be frankly thankful about what is going to be the impact or larger impact, because the policymaker is not going to be exclusively listen to you, is going to be listen to his constituents, is going to be listening to all kinds of interests. So the best part of this is going to be like using this like as a soft power, as like this. So next slide, please, Lovish. Yep. Okay. So one of these amazing strategies that we can do is have like organizations like, for example, ICS3 to give us training and using us an approach to empower us with more information. And using that, for example, in not just ICS3, but only using with other types of information that we can have from all types of organizations actually empowers us to give more knowledgeable on this. And using, for example, widely available training resources like on-demand training, this is going to be the best way to us to like engage with this part. And for example, in all the themes, we can see that here we can use our strategy to get more knowledgeable in MIAs about SIChem, how we can European chemical policy matters to us. So trying to converse all this information and give it us in a simple way that we can do it to give us more power to decide and how to engage. This is going to be the most fundamental thing that we as young people can do for ourselves. So in the next slide, please, Lavish. And of course, we do not want to make this shift from day to another. So with you have self-paced regarding policy making decisions, if you are going to have not going to have just like a crash course on this, is going to be more of a renewable approach, how your work and how your role as chemist or engaged stakeholder can do about this. So it's like a self-training is going to be more than just having real knowledgeable of some information. Is going to be how can you empower yourselves and give you tools to actually actively engage with all this part. So next slide, please, Lovish. So in the next part, so we're going to thank you all of this for this part. And we'd like, just like in the closing remarks, giving you a heads up and thank you all for much for being here. As former listening IC3, thank you for all the panelists and all our invitees who tried to talk about this with today, mainly Ankit and Lisa, Shannon and Lisa for being with us today. And please I just want to have some reconnaissance I have a question of some attendees if this material is going to be available. Yes, this webinar is going to be readily available online. We're just going to share our link afterwards to all the people that were registered to the event. And please engage with all the institutions that we shared here today, to the social links, and also to how to get information on all the institutions and the stakeholders we'll talk today. We also drop in some information when we are going to divulge the last part of our this webinar. Is going to be freely available. So thank you all for being here. Thank you so much for your patience with us, and hopefully we can give you some information that can be more insightful or engaging with science policy and sustainable chemistry. So thank you all for this part, and hope to see you again in the future.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for your time. Have a nice day.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.